Hi guys, I really don't know what to post. Give me a days, please. But today I'm going to be reading my IWA. I took AP seminar last year, and this is basically it. It's about gentrification. I'm kind of out of breath. I ran out the stairs, but I'm going to read it out for everyone. So let me know what you think of it, and other stuff I can do in the comments. How does gentrification negatively impact the development of the psyche? Introduction. The psyche is the totality of elements forming the mind, and it dictates how people handle and navigate through external ultimatums. These elements include thoughts, motivations, and experiences. How the psyche is developed influences the human persona, ego, and how emotions are processed. Consequently, changes in both social and natural environments heavily influence welfare and the development of the psyche. Because the mind adapts to reflect its surroundings, shifts and disturbances in external and emotional environments influence the psyche and how further disturbances are handled emotionally. In recent years, gentrification has been a major factor in why environments shift and establish new norms. As synthesized and extensive research, define gentrification to be a process in which middle income and upper income people acquire deteriorating and undervalued properties in poorer urban communities, rehabilitating the properties to increase its value, eventually transforming the community to characterize the lifestyle of the new residents, and ultimately displacing the indigenous residents who can no longer afford to live in the same area. Renowned scholar Snake Mall traces back the origins of gentrification to be coined in the 1960s, where it was described as the entrance of an urban gentry to and subsequent transformation of working-class areas of London. The term gentrification has evolved to fit the modern landscape, losing some meaning from its historical roots. Note this change and establish that, in contrast to previous decades, 21st century gentrification has become faster and more widespread, creating more extreme neighborhood change in a greater number of neighborhoods. This rapid normalization of gentrification raises many concerns of how it impacts the development of the psyche of younger generations. Ultimately, gentrification is a harm to the development of the human psyche because of its forced displacement of families, fragmentation and isolation of communities, and overall negative impact on the developing psyche of adolescents. The causes of displacement. Gentrification is the primary catalyst for the rising prices and divided socioeconomic classes that forcefully displace families from transformed communities. This phenomenon is especially prevalent in minority and immigrant households. Gentrification in rural and urban areas has had rapid growth in recent years. This is supported by statistics provided by Richard et al. 2019. Richardson provides that Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York experienced gentrification-induced displacement of 47,000 African American residents between 1990 to 2010. Between 2000 to 2013, 110,935 African Americans have been displaced nationally. Similar to this, in Seattle, a study conducted by Rothschild 2019 determined that Seattle had become whiter and wealthier with a population increase of 21,000 white residents between the years 2015 and 2016, effectively and disproportionately displacing communities of color. These represent not only a statistical shift, but a deletion and uprooting of previously established local history and culture. The specific reasons behind these displacements are numerous. For example, in East Boston, many immigrants live in fear of displacement due to high climbing rents. To avoid pricey legal confrontation and the impact of eviction record, many immigrants choose to self-evict themselves. To zone in on a specific example of displacement and displacement-induced anxiety internationally, explained that in Barcelona's Ciutat Vella district, many families have been displaced due to years of hostile rehabilitation and redevelopment projects. These projects usually occur alongside a commercial shift, and the rise of tourism in the area caused an increase in the number of trendy restaurants, bars, and boutiques. These drive locals out who are unable to afford a commute or buy basics. Ultimately, this constant movement of populations due to immigration causes social instability in affected communities. Dragon 2019 supports this by connecting that when families move, they move further from gentrifying neighborhoods than from persistently low socioeconomic status areas. This is consistent with the idea that they may need to travel further to find an affordable home. This constant flow of people in search of communities that support them socially and financially leads to a less defined sense of community and self-identity. The loss of a community identity. The entrance of higher socioeconomic class individuals into lower income communities shifts financial and social class equilibrium in these communities. Huang J. and Sampson R.J. note that this causes an increase in housing prices and amenities and distinct shifts in the demographic, residential, social, cultural, and political context of a neighborhood. These shifts in demographics of neighborhoods causes further tension between existing classes. Furthermore, Braverman and Gottlieb's bunch of people expanded on this by arguing that existing socioeconomic inequities of poverty, poor quality housing, food deserts, unemployment, underemployment, violent crime, and inferior education are social determinants that have an impact on the psychological well-being of individuals in poor urban communities. To further solidify this argument, state that the World Health Organization identifies social determinants of health as conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and age. Social norms, politically inspired agendas, and developing economic policies aid in influencing these conditions. Lee, 2023, suggests that these shifts reflect the Marxian conflict theory, which he defines to be a class struggle between the oppressed and the oppressor. This struggle is present and persistent within the social and cultural transformation of communities affected by gentrification. Yedidia observed that the structural and cultural transformation of gentrified communities is evidenced by the closure of small local businesses, often the result of large corporate stores moving into the area. Crazy. An example of cultural and social friction occurred in a community in the United Kingdom. Kamami and Holiday, 2015, note that the widespread media attention gathered on the serial killer cafe in Shoreditch, London, after it became the focus of anti-gentrification protests in 2015, with protesters arguing that these types of coffee shops did not serve the local community. This divide within communities leads to isolation of certain groups who are socioeconomically disadvantaged and has dire consequences for those affected. Studies conducted by Holt, Lunsford et al. 15. That's like 3 lines. Have consistently shown that among initially healthy and aware people over time, those who are more actively connected with their community have lived longer and led healthier lives. Those who live separated and isolated were most likely to die at an earlier point in life and experience mental and physical health deficits. The erasure of a whole community identity resulting from gentrification undermines social bonds and structures essential for overall health. By focusing on the transformation of communities to serve as tourism spots, vulnerable residents are exposed to severe isolation and communities will experience intense fragmentation. The deterioration of mental and physical health. The socioeconomic transformation and reformation of urban communities erodes the welfare and socioeconomic stability of vulnerable populations and long-term residents. Snake Mall, 2020, supports that by affirming economically deprived neighborhoods are associated with elevated rates of higher disease risk and higher rates of health challenges at the neighborhood and individual level. Specific drivers of gentrification that affect low-income areas include increased real estate and tourism speculation, which contribute to chronic stress, depression, and suicidal thought patterns among residents threatened by eviction and displacement in neighborhoods. The impact on people in lower classes is most visible through the eyes of those experiencing this change firsthand. Angelovsky, 2019, interviewed residents in the Ciutat Vella of Barcelona, who reported having or treated frequent anxiety and depression, particularly those faced with sudden and abrupt rent increases or direct evictions when foreign investors buy entire buildings or revitalize and gentrified streets/blocks. These personal accounts are supported by verified data. A study completed by Palencia et al. 2016 reinforces this connection in its findings, in which 84% of women and 84% of men and 91% of women under threat of displacement due to gentrification have substandard mental health, such as increased anxiety and depression. While this highlights a more widespread crisis, this issue is especially prevalent in youth who endure the fear of their families being displaced due to increases in rent, short-term rentals for tourists, and life opportunities being denied to them. When what is familiar is torn away, what results is chronic anxiety and distress that lead to permanent changes in how one's brain is able to regulate emotions in adversity. Additionally, even though physical health can remain stable, children's psyches are fragile and can be irreparably impacted by their changing surroundings. Confirming this focus, Dragon et al. 2019 observed that there was an intense negative impact on the mental health and general welfare among children faced with gentrified and low-income communities. This psychological deterioration is often due to the environment of the neighborhoods, and Sampson et al. 2002 confirms that disadvantaged neighborhoods place children at an increased risk for a variety of stressful events, including crime and physical social disorder. Overall, these findings conclude that neighborhoods do not only see economic disadvantages due to gentrification, but environmental and social impacts as well. While the external landscape may seem improved by tourists or outside observers, vulnerable and low-income residents receive an invisible and damaging psychological toll. When displacement and divide threaten social order, many children suffer from trauma that has lasting effects on their growth and development. Conclusion. The Furman Center 2016 notes that low-income neighborhoods in New York City have seen particularly large increases in mean incomes, education attainment, and rents. Though these statistics demonstrate overall economic growth, they often overlook a growing psychological crisis among long-term residents. Persistent environmental change and the looming threat of displacement create a state of constant awareness and vigilance along low-income residents. This puts the psyche through continuous and heavy stress over the fear of disruption of social order, displacement, and the loss of one's home. To address the economic crisis fueled by gentrification, governments and policymakers should implement aggressive rent stabilization policies to provide proper security to low-income households living in growing neighborhoods. Furthermore, to nurture the development of children's psyches in these communities, intercommunal investments should be made to preserve cultural landmarks and local businesses that are placeholders in community social life and are available to all classes living in these communities. By prioritizing upholding a community identity over economic gain, society can help to foster an environment that supports mental wellness. Through these combined efforts, the threat and effects of displacement and widening socioeconomic classes due to gentrification will have a muted impact on the developing minds of children living in gentrified communities. This ensures that the urban reformation does not come at the cost of mental wellness. Ultimately, shielding the psyche of young children from the harmful effects of gentrification is not just a matter of urban development, but a step forward in ensuring overall public health and recognized social equity for all. I got a 4 on the exam, by the way. But yeah, that was my little gentrification paper.